I would like to now introduce our moderator for our first panel. Eva Wu is a previous board member of the Youth Arctic Network and is currently a law student at McGill University here in Montreal. Please join me in welcoming Eva.
Alrighty, hi everyone. Thank you, Mark, for all of your amazing, all of your amazing opening comments. Sorry, I was trying to find you in the crowd. I'm really pleased to be sitting alongside 5 amazing panelists today. I believe there was a little bit of a change, but that will be evident as we go through. So with that, I thank you all for being here today. Thank you for coming to this panel. Thank you also to those who are joining us online. And with that, I'll be inviting each of our panelists one by one, and I welcome you to join me on stage. So first up, we have Jay Ritchlin, who is stepping in for David Suzuki today. That's the change. There we have it. He is the Director General for Western Canada and Director for Nature Programs at the David Suzuki Foundation, and leads his team in efforts to achieve the David Suzuki Foundation's vision that we all act every day on the understanding that we are one with nature. Thank you, Jay.
Thank you.
Next up, I'm inviting Livia Arrigoni, who is a partner at Deloitte Montreal and is a leader of the sustainability and climate change practice in Quebec. She has more than 18 years of experience with high-profile clients and conducted a variety of advisory and assurance projects for Canadian public companies. Thank you, Livia. Next up, we have Pamela Steer. As a president and CEO of Chartered Professional Accountants of Canada, Pamela Steer is leading one of the largest professional accounting bodies in the world with more than 220,000 members. And next up, we have the Honorable Rosa Galvez, who is an environmental engineer and an independent senator at the Senate of Canada. And she is also the president of Pal Americans Parliamentary Network on Climate Change. She was previously a professor at Laval University in Quebec for over 25 years. And finally, joining us online, which I believe we can see from over there. There you are. We have Siyám, who is also known as Chief Leanne Joe of the Squamish Nation. She is one of 16 hereditary chiefs of the Squamish Nation and is the first female chief of her Lackett Joe family. She currently serves as a trustee for the Squamish Nation Trust, board member of the New Relationship Trust, and the Women in Leadership Foundation. So thank you all for being here today. I know we all braved some wonderful weather getting here. I myself will be driving through that weather on the way back to get to the airport, so we shall see how that goes. Overall, thank you, Mark, again for your opening introduction about what the Capital Hub is, as well as why we are here today in terms of collaboration. I wanted to open up to the panel in advance that this conversation that we are having is at the end of the day about how we are going to be working together in this transformation. As the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres was saying in his opening, humanity has become a weapon of mass destruction. We are seeing our nature and climate change in unprecedented rates and ways. And we are facing an era where we as people and as society need to work together to find a way to create solutions and implement those solutions as well. And I believe that the 5 of you here today are amazing leaders in this field representing different areas of civil society. We have people working on the ground representing people, their nations, businesses, finance, as well as the Senate and politics and government as well. So the first question that I would like to pose to you folks, and I'd welcome you as well to think maybe 1 or 2 sentences to introduce yourselves in ways that I wasn't able to capture in the 2-sentence allotment that I was given. So the first question I would like to ask you folks is that we are here today to talk about net zero, nature positivity, and equity, all of which are different concepts that need to be addressed in tandem for sustainable development. And also none of which actually exist in silos because they all work together to build a sustainable economy, a sustainable environment, as well as a healthy living population. So when it comes to this, with an intersection of businesses and citizens that push for change, a large driver of this at the end of the day is businesses and industry, as well as government, that sort of set the stage for what is available to citizens to act upon. So how would you say in your industry, you folks are pushing for change as well as looking to implement that change? Maybe you could kick us off.
Afraid of that. First one to open my mouth, that's a hazard. Thank you for having us. Thank you for inviting me. And David sends his regards, having gotten sick a couple of days ago and just had to get home before the snow hit. And he's very sorry he couldn't be here. I am Jay Ritchlin. I live and work and play on the territory of the Squamish Nation. It's a pleasure to see you, Chief, and live near the traditional village of Sxwpilemaát in the town now called Gibsons on the Sunshine Coast, which some may remember from the beachcombers of yore. I am the Director General, as noted, in Western Canada and for our nature programming, and I've been doing this work for over 20 years and watching this evolution of trying to figure out how to talk about the intersection of all these different things. The words being spoken here today are incredible to hear, coming in the setting where we are. I would add that there is one other change, though, that we need to have in the phases that Mark described. We need to change what's happening on the ground. And we maybe need to do that first before we sort everything out, because the rate of loss of nature, of loss of people's homelands, of loss of rights and autonomy and equity is apace. It is faster than we know what to do about it. So I urge us all to consider that while we develop the metrics, while we develop the tools, we also have to listen to those land defenders who are trying to stop their territories from being decimated beyond repair while we have these incredibly important conversations. We've developed tools for helping cities understand how nature supports their well-being. We've educated our supporters and the businesses that we work with about different metrics and ways to fix the way they do business, sustainable fisheries, sustainable aquaculture. But yet at a certain point, there are places where we just need to say no, and that answer needs to be okay for now. And we need to deal with the consequences of that with compassion and looking after the most vulnerable and ensuring that they have a way to survive while the rest of us figure out new ways to do our work. I think as an opening statement, I'll leave that there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jay. We really do understand that even at COP, there were protests, there were land defenders, there were people advocating for this kind of change. And it is so necessary because we hear it on the news all the time, all these stories about people being pushed away for the opinions that they're trying to say. Well, businesses and industries oftentimes say a completely different story at the same time. I would like to now pass the mic over to Livia. I've also been talking a lot this week. Over to Livia, who works at Deloitte, which I myself am a former alumni as a consultant. Knowing this industry, it is definitely something that is pushing for change in ways that may not be the same as what Jay was talking about. How would you see that can be reconciled?
Thank you for the question, Eva, and I would like also to thank EY for hosting us here. I'm very happy to be here at this panel and feel honored to be in company of such great people and leaders today. Of course, I think that from a business perspective, there is definitely an awareness and education team, and that becomes a more change management type of issue if we think about it, because when we think about translating all these concepts into action, then you need to change people behavior, and this is where it becomes complicated and difficult. During the week, we had the opportunity to interact with clients and sustainability leaders in some of Canadian leading organizations, and there is definitely a lot of enthusiasm about the topic and biodiversity, and an acknowledgement that this is something like a systemic issue and cannot be resolved by companies in isolation, and even by sort of the historical economic way to look at things, like think about competition and being one against each other, like how in fact instead it's possible to open up more of a discourse for collaboration and how sectors or geographies can collaborate together to start this change. But most definitely, there is also the sense of urgency, as you mentioned, Jay. I mean, it's really important to sort of start acting and recognizing that this is a journey, but we are really running out of time. So it's important to start somewhere, even if it's not going to be perfect, but it's also like a matter of time to that is important to start at this point.
Thank you, Livia. Maybe I'll pass it to Pamela Steer next. How would you say the financial sector would play into all of this? As Mark mentioned earlier, there's different ways of evaluating and definitely different tools that are coming out, as well as new data that can support all of this. How would you say that the financial sector is able to help facilitate this change in ways that we haven't been able to see before based on our knowledge of economics and accounting?
Thanks so much, Eva, for that introduction. And I again, I echo what Livia just said. I'm honored to be here and be able to participate in this really important launch and important week. And I think action is clearly the order of the day for sure. And the urgency is only increasing with the days and time. And I would say that the finance community at large, I'm representing the CPA profession here, but the finance community at large has a huge role to play. We are everywhere. We have been in the past the keepers of trust, the keepers of score, if you would like to say, but I think there is so much opportunity for the profession to help in three really fundamental ways. One is in more enhancement of integrated work, integrated thinking. So integrating these concepts of sustainability broader than just financial, but operational, biodiversity, natural metrics. We look at social issues, we look at human capital, and that's where it all kind of comes to roost within the business community. So integrating all of these concepts is really important in order to make change and in order to engender accountability when people make these statements like, oh, we're going to be net zero by 2030. Well, what does that mean? And this group is helping with the measurement of that, but we can help ensure that accountability happens and that there are true and real measurements available. And that comes with integrated thinking. Collaboration, as you said, Livia, I think is really important. The second piece, which I've heard some really great announcements this week at COP, is with respect to the standards, and Mark did speak to that in his opening address as well. Having high quality standards from which we can make these measurements. As many of you would realize or know, the Integrated Sustainability Standards Board, yes, acronyms everywhere, was announced last year at COP26, has already taken amazing steps, and this week has announced further that while climate was the most urgent area in which they wanted to take action with respect to disclosure standards and requirements, so emissions tracking, emissions reporting, and scenario analysis for future-looking information, they've now gone further, and their next agenda items are indeed exactly what we're talking about here, and that is social capital, human capital, biodiversity, and then how it all does get integrated with the current financial reporting and how we can make things better. And then the third, and I think this is where we get to the ground and how we can help, and that's in education. Education rises all boats economically, and there is a huge opportunity to work with our partners across Canada, across the globe, is to learn from different ways of thinking that I'm sure Chief Leanne Joe will address in a moment, but to take some of those more traditional ways of thinking and incorporating them into what we have so that we can make it better, that we can make it more accountable, that we can help globally improve education rates and improve the capability of people to make good decisions, thoughtful decisions, and make a change. Because while I agree business has a lot to do to make positive change, it's also a demand piece and what people do and how they choose to live their lives that will make a real lasting difference and require change. And just in the last few years, what we've seen is these movements from people, regular people, are causing change on a global scale in a really positive way. And I'm looking forward to doing whatever I can with whatever platform we have here to help in that effort.
Thank you, Pamela. And I think we can all echo here that we are all trying to do whatever we can to be able to advance sustainability, biodiversity, and climate change goals overall. And with that, Senator Galvez, what would you say, since you are in a sense speaking for people in Canada as well?
Thank you, Eva. Thank you very much. Me too. I want to acknowledge and thank for the invitation to have the opportunity to talk to all of you and be in the company of these very distinguished professionals and citizens. And I agree with all what have said before. You said to start with some words that were not described myself. So yes, it's true, I'm an engineer, I'm a scientist, now I'm a senator, but I'm also mother of 3 and grandmother of 3. And I cannot dissociate my roles from a teacher, from a scientist, from a background of indigenous. You know, I did my DNA test and 70% I'm indigenous. And I remember my grandmother in the Amazon, looking for medicine and helping women to have children. It's impossible for me to dissociate me in different people. And so one of the things that worries me is that we are behind. Canada is behind in many aspects. These externalities that the financial sector, call externalities, there's a lot of pollution, waste, destruction of nature. And when we destroy nature, we just shoot in our feet because we are nature. Nature is us. We are part of that. And in my years as an engineer and as a professor, I was always looking into nature-based solutions and into work with nature and to help nature. And even I went into using genomics to help understand what are the microbes that biodegrade oil spills, And I'm so happy that you're saying, Mark, that the sector is asking for regulations. I was there during Lac Mégantic accident. I was there, and when I became a senator, I started regarding and evaluating all the regulations that were taken out for the transport of dangerous substance. And then I realized and concluded that this accident was just waiting to happen because we took out everything. So we had a train with so many wagons containing a dangerous substance, conducted by one person, and the firefighters didn't know what was inside this. So it was like crazy, So I know that we have to regulate. I know that science is in the front. Then second, we come engineers, and very, very, very in the back, legislation is coming. And I have put a legislation in March aligning the climate commitments with the finance sector. And I've been told that, this is a complex matter. It's a complex. And so I come back to the language, the conversation, and the rules. And I understand your talk. I am understanding is, and I'm an engineer. I don't know if you're a lawyer or an economist, but I am understanding what you are saying. So that's great. And so it's true that, we are at COP27. I was in Egypt, and we are at COP27. Scientists have demonstrated without unequivocally the causes for climate change. And engineers have developed plenty of technologies for producing energy with renewable sources. So what is next? What's missing? Why we are not acting? Why Canada couldn't meet the 9 targets? We have had targets galore, and we don't get to there. Why it is? I think that what it's missing is this, the thing, the tool, which is the financial sector that moves the way we act. At the same time, I think nobody wants to be seen only as a consumer. No, we don't want to be seen just as a consumer. We are citizens. And so we have values. And we need to rethink our relationship with nature, because otherwise, you know, the planet is going to keep spinning, and the planet is not going to stop. What's happened is that our civilization as we know it, and I've seen it, I've been in the Caribbean islands, I see what erosion can do. I was in Fraser River Valley. These extreme weather events are happening more often. You will remember 22, the year as we start accepting that extreme weather event is not an exception, is the norm. So yes, we have to move on the legislation, and we're addressing the elephant on the room, and this is important, but we have to go into the action. And to the action is like, you know, what I'm doing in my home with the way I consume. I'm asking the right question. It's been a while. I've been asking that everything that is in the grocery store has a label saying how much is recycled, what is the carbon footprint. And so, yes, we need to change the way we do things, the way we live. And we have also the responsibility, the global north has also responsibility towards indigenous people, not only in here in Canada, but also in the Amazon. I met with indigenous people from Brazil. They have grievances against some extractive industries. And so there's a lot of things to repair, but we have to move to the action. And so I'm going to say that disclosures are important, but we have to go beyond disclosure. We cannot just stop at disclosure. We have to have a plan, and we have to have a goal. And the next COP, we shouldn't be calling it implementation. We should call it a report on implementation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator Galvez. I think all of your words here today really reinforce all of the things that we've been hearing throughout COP, and all of the actions that need to happen in order to address the biodiversity and the climate loss that we're facing right now. I'd like to finally pass it off to Chief Joe. What are your perspectives in terms of how we can work together? I know before this panel, when we were grouping together, we were speaking about the heartbreaking experiences that you and your family and your people have had in the Fraser River Valley and in British Columbia overall, where it is a nexus of industry and of exploitation, coupled with Indigenous people trying to manage the land. How can we act as good allies in this transition? How can we be on the ground, stopping this change? How can we be supporting in other ways as well? What are your words in terms of that?
Oh, where to begin? The first thing is my greatest role in this world is being a mother. Period. I wear many hats, but at the end of the day, I am here to leave a legacy for my child and for my unborn grandchildren and for all the people yet to be. And if I'm constantly in the center of that knowing from here, then that wholly brings out every ounce of heart space and healing space towards the well-being of future generations. How do we break down silos? Let's stop drawing lines. Let's stop ownership. We fight over land, protection of water, land back, cash back, you name it. There's so many defining spaces. And we don't look specifically at the center of the well-being of all things. So, you know, we call new economies circular economies and all this kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, are we collectively looking at well-being in this country? And what does that, you know, what does that mean for us? What values are being held up? And how do we center our children and families in every single space? How do we center their happiness in every single space? How do we also bring into question our accountability in space, meaning like we as human beings taking ourselves several notches down, that we are the dominant, where we don't see ourselves as the dominant species, but as equals to all living things on this planet. Meaning that, again, I don't see my value any more important than the grass or the trees or the water or the universe. And the other thing too is calling to action our education system to really shift what they are educating our future generations. We have so many people that come out of university, post-secondary or whatever training or just lived experience with the notion of colonialism and capitalism at the forefront, and doesn't intersect with other ways of being and doing. And, you know, they come out and then all of a sudden out of, you know, into their young careers, being constantly passionate about climate justice, climate action, sustainability, biodiversity, all of these things, reconciliation. But how much of that is completely embedded in our education system from for the expectation of K-12s and then more specifically post-secondary institutions. Those are just a few things that come to my mind in how do we break down these silos? How do we work collaboratively? I would have a ton to say about Crown Indigenous relations as well, but I won't go there because we all know that that is an ongoing issue. But a solution is to look towards natural law. Look in your own backyard. Look to your First Nation community, whose territory you work, live, and play in, and look at what they're doing. And learn from them, create relationships and build partnerships and collaborations. Because with their natural law, they already have established those well-being practices, those value sets, because of their interconnected relationship to land and place. And the language is embedded all of these values and that those governance systems towards the well-being of all things. So that's a great starting place, is to not to see us as others, but to be in full relationship, not only as equals, but leaders in space. We'll see him.
Thank you, Chief Joe. And that is something that is crucially important. Myself as a law student, and I've noted a couple people, some of my peers here today as well, have learned a lot in school in a very colonial system nonetheless, that legal pluralism and the intersection of different ways of knowing is crucial to advancing knowledge, to advancing cooperation, and also furthering a sustainable future. And this is a segue into our second question that we want to explore, is how do we synergize these different ways of knowing? How do we recognize the value that traditional knowledge has in our sustainable, equitable, and net zero future? We've heard lots of talk regarding Indigenous protected areas in terms of honoring and being good allies. But how is it that we as citizens, as businesses, as well as industry, how can we truly act in that space? And also, how do we recognize that traditional knowledge is oftentimes treated as gray knowledge when we sit here today saying that we need data, we need evidence, but this data and evidence is captured in a lot of people who are on the land already? Chief Joe, maybe I'll give you a break on this front, and maybe we can have you respond to the other panelists' answer at the very end. I'd like you to have the last word on this, but maybe I'll pass it off to Jay once again, if you want to start us off, unless you want to take a break as well. We'd love to hear what the four of you have to say in this front in terms of how are we being allies in this transition.
It's a starting point is to know the people whose territory you're on. And I don't mean just know the name of them, but to know them and to ask if you can get to know them better and to learn about their natural law, their indigenous law, and to listen to them when they tell you what the right and wrong thing to do in their territory is. You see so many times that the law is used to continually come back and say, get a yes, no matter what the initial answer was. And that's a form of violence in and of itself. I know Squamish Nation Rights and Title Office has a stack of referrals. They had to create an entire online portal system just to keep up with the people coming in to say, we want something from your territory. And so with that kind of, I just call it an onslaught, it is almost impossible to then develop the time and the relationship to teach other people about what the law is on your territory. So that reconciliation piece is really about first getting to know and listening and wondering if you're welcome to be in that space. We're in projects ourselves. We work with the Conservation Through Reconciliation Project, which is linked to the University of Guelph and is led by and co-led by Indigenous and non-Indigenous legal scholars and experts in a variety of fields. And so trying to work through the technicalities of law is one piece, but we'll be working in the new year to start at the principles. Where do we meet on the principles of how law does work, should work, and who should have the seat at those tables about conversation? So for me, that is a really important starting place. We've come to a time in society where the federal and the international law has so much authority and power that the local and land-based law needs to be put back in its place of perhaps first power, and that's I'll leave that as my opening for that. Thanks.
Thank you, Jay. And realistically speaking, that's how it should have always been as well, at least in my perspective. And maybe to Livia, how would you respond to that? Because Deloitte oftentimes works in an industry where you do recognize the federal and provincial laws first and foremost, but you're also working in a space where you're trying to redefine the role that consulting and risk advisory teams play and redefine the way that business is done. So how do you think that businesses in your industry can help foster this?
Oof, this is a very interesting question, and coming after
Hard
Jay
questions.
is always a pleasure. So it is a super complex question again, but I think that I'm grateful for the type of effort that my organization is putting forward and especially we have a net zero commitment. We have a reconciliation action plan that we put together in 2020. And I would say that the tone at the top is extremely strong. So we are really acknowledging that we are on a journey, at the same time recognizing that what we're putting forward is not perfect, but definitely we are committed to constantly improve. We have Indigenous leaders who are actually partners at the firm that are involved in all these matters and help us to kind of think differently. In particular, the reconciliation plan is focused around 4 pillars. We have education, and somebody mentioned that. We have inclusion, we have economic empowerment and employment as well. And so similar to today, for example, for every important meeting, we do an acknowledgement of the land. If we have an Indigenous person on the team, that is the person who usually does that. I did some of them earlier this week, and for me it's just an honor to be able to do something like this. I find it very powerful. We do that for important clients meeting, kickoffs. We try to really embed this in our culture, in the way we operate, so that it's not something distant and sort of far from our reality. And to be honest, our young talent love what we are doing, and they're constantly engaged and asking questions, sometimes difficult questions, honestly, but it's also part of how we are trying to go. Another example is that we have education is, again, super important. So we have a mandatory training now that is the 4 seasons of reconciliation. It is something that I personally took a few months ago and was really powerful. This is the mandatory training for everyone from the board down to everyone who is joining the firm. And that training, I remember I was even crying during the training, is very, very powerful. But now we are talking about the training with clients, and we are even allowed to offer the training to family members, friends. And we were discussing with a client earlier this week about how we can actually provide the training to them so that they can scale it in their own organization. So we understand that we have a privileged role in society because we work with so many public companies, institutional investors, government, private sector, so not for profit as well. So we are really like working with so many leaders across a variety of sectors that it is important for us to sort of embed what we're trying to do. And I'd say that sustainability has become more of a commitment for the entire organization as a whole. Our impact report is online if you want to have a look, but more than that, in the way we are operating with our clients, the solutions that we are thinking about are quite ambitious, and there is a lot of innovation happening at the firm right now, trying to connect the dots and collaborate internally, breaking silos between what tax used to do and consulting used to do, and what verification used to do, and what advisors used to do, just to try to say, okay, these are systemic issues, let's break these silos and let's try to work together, because this is what clients are asking for. And so definitely there are many things that we are doing, and also like facilitating ecosystems to reflect around thought leadership. For example, we put forward a paper on sustainable aviation fuel that was a collaboration between different airlines and airports, and just to try to understand what does it mean for this industry to go to net zero really. And that was an interesting exercise for us to engage in an ecosystem and again facilitate conversations.
Thank you. And yes, for sure, like at least from my experience with Deloitte and many other firms like it, like Ernst & Young, where we are today, they are industries where you touch upon so many people, and taking that leadership role can be the first step to creating some form of change. And it is really amazing to hear that firms are starting to explore this, since for many decades now, activists and youth and Indigenous people have been trying to keep industries accountable for the impacts that they create, and to take a step forward in that direction, I think, is one method of approaching that. So maybe in terms of that, Pamela, what would you say in regards to this, since your role in tax and accounting, and sorry, not tax, but in accounting overall, does play a huge role in terms of how this all trickles out into the real world?
Absolutely, and I of course agree with my colleagues, and I would say I look at it in two ways. It's a very personal journey as well as in my professional role, and they're indivisible, as the senator indicated earlier. So in my personal journey, I've only been in this role and been very privileged to be for 7 months, and the education that I've undergone is incredible. And the more I learn, the more I realize I have to learn. It's a long way to go. And I've been very privileged to travel across this country and up to Yellowknife as well this year, and learn about Original peoples in all of these different nations, and the Métis and the Inuit, and to learn what their systems and values are, and how, again, referring back to my earlier response, integrated thinking is so important. And I've been very blessed. I know I saw Scott earlier in the room, Scott Monroe, and the First Nations Financial Management Board has been so helpful to the profession in educating and bringing us along. And we have a very great partnership with them, as well as with our financial literacy corporate citizenship group. And we do a lot of work with Indigenous peoples on the education front, which is so important. And when CPA Canada partnered with others in reviewing standard setting in Canada, we made sure, actually Scott's colleague Jordy sits on that independent review committee to ensure that Indigenous values, Indigenous views are incorporated as we look at standard setting in Canada. And indeed, I was very excited this week to see the International Sustainability Standards Board appoint Jordy Hungerford, who is the CEO at First Nations Financial Management Board, as a special advisor to help on these reconciliation discussions and in biodiversity and in human capital and these social issues that are so important. And so I agree with Livia, we have 220,000 professionals that we can help educate and bring along and integrate these different and be open and humble about integrating these different points of view. We can do it internally at our organization, which is much smaller, of course, but it starts at home and the tone in the top. So recruitment, education, supply chain, and education internally. So again, much like Deloitte, we have also embarked on an education program internally for our staff. I have been on a virtual tour of a residential school that interviewed survivors. That was very powerful, very moving, and really important for me and the team as we go on our personal journeys, which also contribute to the professional journey. And the profession as well across Canada has a number of initiatives, which I'm really proud we are a part of, as well as a newly formed Indigenous guidance team, which is working with the different nations and communities right across Canada to assist. And particularly, we just completed a pilot program of helping Indigenous women who are entrepreneurs and helping them with launching their businesses. And I'm looking forward to seeing a fuller rollout of that pilot program, which was very successful. So what I would say is personal journey combined with the professional journey. And the more that I learn as I go, the more that I know I have to learn, and I'm open to learning it and working on new ways of thinking and integrating it into everything that we do, which again is at the heart of businesses and organizations and governments everywhere. Finance, accounting, and that kind of work touches every aspect of human society, and we can be a positive catalyst for change.
Thank you, Pamela. Senator Galvez, would you have a response to this, since you were talking earlier about how there is so much change going on, that you're advocating for a lot of these different elements? How would you say you're pushing this even further now that there are industries and organizations like CPA ready to back these measures?
Yes, thank you very much for the question. I would like to start by talking about Overshoot Day. You know, that is a metric that tells you how well we are doing in our relationship with nature. So Canada Overshoot Day is in March, in someday early March. It should be December, you know, it should be for everybody, 31st of December, but for us is in March, early March. So that indicates that we are consuming the resources produced in 1 year in only a few months, and the average for the planet is in June. This linear way of our economy leads to huge inequalities, and we see it inequalities here in Canada, and we see it everywhere in the world. And inequalities brings distrust in the democratic process, and so this is what we are seeing today. If you ask, the poll says that in Canada and everywhere else in the world, you know, we trust doctors, we trust scientists, we trust teachers, and one of the last ones that we trust are politicians. And so we need to understand how these inequalities are generated and what are the causes. So is this overconsumption, and try to address the inequalities. So in this, for example, in this bill that we propose, we talk about reconciliation, but we also talk about just transition. So this is very important, because Canada is a vast country with different economies and different resources and different ways of seeing things. So, for example, one of the issues with the bill is we are technology agnostic. We don't want to say to a province, go in your net zero race, use this technology, because we know that is different and the situation is different. And so we are, in my position as senator, I contacted many stakeholders, we receive many letters and we discuss. And so we see that we are forgetting a lot of people. We're forgetting women, we're forgetting workers, and of course we are forgetting indigenous people. And some of these minorities, oppressed minorities, have many oppressing factors at the same time. So yes, I'm so happy that we are helping women and women entrepreneur and indigenous women. There is a statistics that says that, you know, if we help women, we help 5 people. If we help men, we only help 1 person. So, you know, the present government has a feminist policy, and that's good. And as why, one of the reasons because I like Parlaméricas is because they have 3 axes of action, not only talking, but actions. One is open governments, open parliaments. I think, coming from a developing country, that corruption is when the rules are not clear, when the gray zones appear. When there is gray, there is the place for corruption. So we need transparency, we need open governments, we need accountability. We need that every part of the every leg of the table, the stable table of democracy works. And so, you know, we are overloading the judicial system right now because of all these gray zone in the legislation concerning, for example, like responsibility of corporation on nature destruction, or the corporation responsibility on waste creation, on this huge plastic patch that is floating in the Pacific. And so we need transparency. But the other axe is gender equality. And when I go to Latin America, gender equality with respect to indigenous people is so important. It is absolutely crucial that we push for gender equality. And again, statistics says that even in Canada, if we continue at the pace that we are going, it's going to take 100 years before we reach gender equality, you know. And I am very well placed to tell you that it was not easy for an immigrant woman to be a scientist, to be an engineer, to be in a high academic, and be now in politics. So nobody has to tell me anything. I know. And I know that there is, you know, some advantages of creating muscle, being like a salmon, always, you know, swimming against the current. Yes, we muscle, but, you know, it shouldn't be like that. It shouldn't be like that. It should be easy. And the third axe is fighting climate change. And now I want to say that the crisis of biodiversity loss and climate change are intrinsically related. And I am here at COP15, and I'm hearing the discussions, and I cannot stop but making the parallel with discussions that we had on the COP for climate change 10 years ago. And so I asked this question to our Minister of Environment, and his answer was, oh, it's because why we will do simple when we can do complicated. You know, that's not a nice answer. And I think that we have to stop trying to reinvent the wheel, but at the same time, I don't think that the system can just be tweaked and that we will get the answers. We really need to reflect. But as my colleague from Suzuki Foundation said, while we reflect on all these very important methods and metrics, we need to get action going. Thank you.
Thank you. And once again, I'd like to pass it off to Chief Joe to provide any reflections you may have. I think there are so many different perspectives that are taken in terms of advancing knowledge plurality, of integrating different ways of knowing, and in respecting other people, and especially Indigenous people, in this just transition. Though, as we know, just transition, as Senator Galvez also alluded to, sometimes leaves people behind. There are different ways to approach it. There are stories of friends and family members and colleagues who go through these so-called just transitions, especially in a renewable resource economy, where extractivism and exploitation is still very much at the heart and center of this transition. Do you have any responses in terms of what the other panelists have said? And also, do you have words of wisdom that we can take away with us in terms of implementing traditional knowledge and reconciliation in our lives too?
I don't claim to have any solutions, just so you know. I only bring love and light to space to be able to really get at the heart of what is being discussed. And I heed everything that has been said. The only thing that I would add to what this panel has shared, again, is you know, to create equality and equity, you have to have relationship. To have reconciliation, you have to have relationship. It doesn't get any easier than that, right? We cannot create trust without relationship. We cannot do self-reflection and interconnectivity and intersectionality without relationship. So I go back to the place of what was shared at the beginning of the importance of, again, looking in your backyard and build relationship with your communities. And yes, it is overwhelming for every single nation who has copious amounts, like huge stacks of referrals to go through, and are reconciling ourselves. We are healing ourselves. We are moving through oppressive spaces consistently, being governed by an Indian Act in this country still. We're still dealing with immense racism and discrimination. But I echo also what the senator shared about rematriation. If you are upholding women in space, in every single space, then you are helping those nations, those communities, the land and the water, and are creating space for them to participate in that just transition spaces. You are not leaving anyone behind, because these women are the leaders and or the matriarchs of all the decisions being made in community in a traditional way. And the other thing that came to my mind as well is the importance of not only embedding and understanding and learning and unlearning Indigenous ways of knowing, being, and doing, is how do you take it a step further and do some self-reflection about your systems in space, right? So if you're looking at financial systems, if you're looking at law, if it doesn't matter what space it is, you're still basically trying to fit an orange or a round peg into a square by doing that. And you're just embedding it into a colonial and very capitalistic system. So in my economic reconciliation framework, I bring, you know, the question of again, this self-reflection of the systems itself, and how do we look to either dismantle some of them, but in more specifically transform through natural law, traditional ways of knowing and being and doing, to actually create new spaces where things can be done. And that's not an easy task. This is a huge, wicked problem. We all know that, or else we wouldn't be here. But again, I go back to solving these wicked problems by centering myself and grounding ourselves in the fact that every decision I make, that my son is bearing witness every single day to the work that we're doing. And if I'm constantly centering him and all of the generations to come with the knowledge of the ancestors of our past, and with the knowings that we have today, that we can be in action towards a just transition in a wicked problem. And it comes through both small and big acts. So I'm not really saying anything much differently than I think what has already been shared. It's just, again, centering in a place of well-being, and in a place of healing, right? And constantly holding that love and light towards that space. I hope that helps a little.
Thank you so much. I think we all need a little more love and light in all respects, especially as we come to a close with COP15. We're coming to the end of the second week, as time would have it. And that leads us to one of our final questions, in a sense, where the outcomes of this week have left many with mixed feelings. Some are saying that the targets from the Aichi targets were not achieved, and that leaves mixed reactions to the existing post-2020 framework that is being negotiated right now. So the question that I have for the panelists at this point is, what are your reflections from COP15, and what does that bode for your community? And also, what would you say to the audience in terms of the takeaways that should be reflected on when they go back home in terms of collaboration, in terms of furthering biodiversity and climate change and equality, gender and otherwise, when you come back from this sort of space where you meet so many new people and exist in conversation across so many different platforms? How would you take it home and digest it to apply to your communities? Maybe I'll give Jay a break. Perhaps, Chief Joe, we could start with you this time. I know you just spoke, but I don't want to leave you hanging as the last panelist to speak every time. So let's give the floor to you again.
Thank you. Not having participated physically in the events that have happened at COP15, but my heart is constantly in that space of being pulled in many directions around not meeting targets, not seeing enough being done, because our children are in crisis, in existential crisis about their future, and what that looks like, and it not being totally a shining bright light. But again, this comes down to small, for me personally, just small empowering spaces being to create for our children, to see a brighter future, to let them know that we are working diligently towards that brighter future, but mostly empower them so that we're not having, they are not having these same conversations down the road. And how is that done is, again, small actions. I look back to, if we talk about economic reconciliation, let's go back to the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples. Let's look to the TRC calls to action. Let's look to the National Indigenous Economic Development Strategy. Let's look to the 231 calls to action. Let's look at OECD's links to learning, or regional development, and linking to regional development. There's some beautiful, beautiful spaces that have laid out a roadmap for us to take, and there's organizations out there, as mentioned, the First Nations Financial Management Board, that are, again, Native Women's Association of Canada, doing brilliant, brilliant work. And how do we look to supporting and uplifting and amplifying and working in collaboration and partnerships in all of these spaces, for these, again, small solutions, these smaller actions that we can take both in a personal way and in a professional way. And again, I don't have any great solutions. I don't have a paintbrush that's going to fix any of this. None of us do. But again, just how do we do this? For me, comes down to, how does each of us take the responsibility and the accountability to do these small things in great ways, in both our professional and personal lives. And that's going to be different, again, in every single region, because how it is for me on the Coast Salish territories, I look to my natural law of the potlatch, right, for solutions around governance, around choices of economic development, around sustainability, guardianship, protection of land and water, and protection of our territories against extraction, so that my son does have a future. But that'll be different for those that are up north and in the prairies and back east and down south. And again, I know we're global nations, but at the end of the day, you know, our sustainability comes from the land that's right in front of us that we walk on every single day. So I would constantly go back to where my feet are planted for those solutions. And I think if we again take these little shifts in our mindsets and place them in our heart, that we can potentially really shift how things are done on a day-to-day basis in many spaces.
Thank you, Chief Joe. Senator Galvez, I might pass it off to you for a response.
Like Chief Leanne, I want to say that every decision that I take, I pass it through the lenses of my 3 grandchildren. There is no decision that I make without having them in mind, because I've been in this field for 37 years and I could be depressed very fast, very fast, because of the inaction and because of the slow pace. And, you know, many of my students too, it's so dramatic when a student comes and tells you, I don't want to have a family. I don't want to have a child. It really gets me very sad. So the way I am an optimist by choice. And so I know that when I'll go back to the Senate in February, I will keep with my work. I will continue publishing white papers. I will keep raising and asking embarrassing questions to the government. And I will, you know, push for my bill. And if you want to help me, well, you can write to my office and see, and we're going to do endorsements, we do petitions, and we push for this. And we have overwhelming support, which is, this is, for me, is very positive. But that doesn't change that, yes, I see the COPs as places where we exchange ideas, we exchange best practices, we get to increase our network, and that is positive. But immediately I will go home and I will do, like every year, take so many new trees planted in my garden. I have been in a net zero waste in my municipality. We weigh our waste every week, so I know how much waste I produce. And I try to visit Canada and talk to the indigenous people of my province, of other provinces, and understand. And you have something, there is a film called Issue with Issue. And I recommend that you watch this film because there are so many facts and so many things that I said. And at the end of the film, there are so many actions that as an individual, we can go home and do it. Are you surprised if I tell you that between 1% and 6% of Canadians suffer of hoarding psychological issues? I hope no, but this is a reality. So we cannot be seen only as a consumers. I hope that eventually economics is going to be circular completely, and we will read in the news that our circularity is growing. I hope that, and if you have any ideas, please share it with us. And my office is always open to ideas because, you know, like with women, if the government decision is based only on male perspective, we are not considering the perspective of the other half of the society. And the same thing, we need to see the perspective of the youth and the indigenous. Every perspective is immigrants. It's so. Let's don't waste all the lessons of the COVID-19. It was so important that we reflect on all the things that happen, and like these workers in the health. And now we can talk maybe about the care economy, which is important too. And so let's don't waste this crisis, and let's learn, and let's change our ways. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Pamela?
Thank you, Eva. I think things like the COPs, so 27, 15 this week, are such important opportunities to get together for different nations, because it is one planet, right? We're all gasping these days, but it's that there's one oxygen tank. We haven't figured out how to live on Mars yet. It's not really appealing to me. I like my planet. I want it to be a better place. But they offer opportunities. They also focus public attention, which I think is really helpful, because as we were talking about earlier, it's also really important for people like us to put pressure on governments to make change, to put pressure on business to make change. You'll note that a lot of Canada's largest pension plans have made significant changes in their portfolios, and that is because of their members putting pressure on them. That's a good thing. We need to recognize that we all have a voice, and we have to exercise that voice in public. It's not just they, it is we, and it's all of us together. So those elements, I think, to take action and to be active in society and to make our demands and changes known. And then that's probably more on the personal. And on the professional, it is to take in those actions. I think that what we've seen, certainly from the International Sustainability Standards Board this week, those announcements about Scope 3, Scope 2 emissions and the requirements that are coming into place very quickly, which is going to be hard for businesses, but that's important. We need to hold them to account. They need to be accountable, and they need to demonstrate in a clear and consistent and transparent way how they're making positive change. So I think that's really important. The announcement also on the focus on the agenda planning for the other capitals, much as this launch demonstrates today, is so important. And the appointment of special advisors, including Indigenous representation by Geordie Hungerford, I think are really positive. So these are forums and opportunities for demonstrated action, because people, they don't want to come to a big forum like this and say nothing's happened. We have to show that things are moving, and I think action is really important, but I think we're seeing it. Much like the senator, I choose to be an optimist. I have so much hope. It is easy to get depressed, but I do see, even in the last 5 years, 7 years since I was involved in helping to set up Accounting for Sustainability in Canada as a global effort, or the Institute for Sustainable Finance, there has been a massive shift. And even I was on a board meeting this morning on an investment board, and 5 years ago, 6 years ago, when we started that fund and the board, sustainability wasn't always talked about. It was like, oh, well, that's not really my role here. I'm an investor. I'm here to get you the most money that I can on your portfolio. I can tell you it is a core piece of every presentation we get now. And it is a core measurement, and there is a change in how those investments get made and what they invest in and what they choose not to invest in, which is just as important. So we talked about thermal coal today and getting out of those investments completely, and how that entire investment organization and advisors policies, let's say, have shifted over time to remove those things. So those actions are happening, and we need to make them more visible. We need to hold people and organizations to account, and we need to demonstrate transparency, accountability, and the will that we all have to make that positive change. And I'm really looking forward to being a part of that and a visible part of that, and do what we can in our profession to see it happen.
Thank you. Now, Livia.
Wow, so many great things have been said, so I'm very grateful to be here. So I would like to share an anecdote about a person I met today. He's a CEO of a small, medium company, I would say. And so not a listed company with investors asking data and all sorts of things. So we were discussing about how they can create a sustainable an association related to his industry and with a sustainability lens. And at some point I was asking, and what's about your own company? What do you do? And he said, I'm very curious actually. I would be curious to understand what is this science-based target initiative that is out there, because some of my business contacts are talking about that. What does it mean? I was like, well, why are you interested in approaching something like this? Typically, it is not something that an organization like yours would be expected to undertake, but I can see in the market signals from investors and banks that are now engaging with their clients to get targets, right? And he said, I know that I don't need to do it, but it's the ambition. And that made me reflect about something, and I want to share it with this room. That is, at the end of the day, it is very personal what you do, right? So everything we do is very personal. On these boards, on these executive committees, that are people. So, and people have influence, have the power to change things, but it needs to be personal, which makes me reconnect to what Chief Leanne said before. It is about the relationship you create with something, with a concept, with an idea, with the people that represent that idea. So I think that kind of makes me reflect about the fact that at the end of the day, if we wait for somebody else to change it, for somebody else to make it perfect, to clarify all the different nuances and difficulties that may exist, then we'll never do fundamentally anything. Even with net zero, we have observed, for example, that the companies have gone ahead of government sometimes. They established targets when it was not even required. Why? Because they had a vision, they had a purpose, they wanted to do something about it. When I started my studies, I studied management for cultural institution and not-for-profit. When I was mentioning to my peers at the university that I wanted organizations to have a purpose beyond profit, people were looking at me like, well, how do you mean? And that was the answer, okay, so this seems very progressive. Fast forward 20 years, I think that now we are in a different place in society, right? So I can see definitely these conferences as being at least a good way to keep the attention of people focused on these matters. And of course, we have a large movement in the youth as well that is pushing the adults and people that are more advanced in their career to take action. So I think all of that is positive. But reconnecting to the business and how they can do things differently, I think a push from the financial sectors would be beneficial, because as we have seen with net zero, if the financial sector is committing, this translates into the economy and into other sectors as well. So I think that would be very, very, very crucial. And the other aspect is that it is important to act, and we're all saying this. So what we are trying to convince our clients to do about is to kind of reinforce their business case, so that when they go to the board and convince to get funds and budgets to implement initiatives, they can do it successfully, which is all that we want. Sometimes it's not easier, but people, they acknowledge that biodiversity may be the next big thing after climate, which is great. But I think that needs also some help to start off, having an ecosystem pushing in a certain direction, so their business case can become more substantial and convince people. So but again, it's personal, so there is a role to play for everyone.
Thank you so much. And last but definitely not least, Jay.
I'm feeling the specter of David Suzuki over my head, like I should be pounding the table and leaving you all with some charge out kind of message, but I'll do my best. I do want to say, though, something that I've heard David say many, many times. We are all nature, and what we do to nature, we do to ourselves, and that we are all interrelated and interdependent. So we need to start there. We need to keep that at the basis, our children and grandchildren, And all of our relations that can't speak for themselves and can't vote and can't invest in a stock portfolio, the rivers, the trees, the fish, the animals out there, they have to be at the heart of what we think about and what we do. When I think about COP, I think sometimes you don't want to go to these square buildings with square rooms and, dare I say, sometimes square people in them. The indigenous village down at the old port was such a different place. It was there for a weekend. I don't know how many got to go, but the Shaputan, the traditional Innu building, was breathing the whole time. The wind had the building breathing, and you could feel the difference in the room when you talk to people. So those are real things. Those are not just concepts. And the thing that's stymieing the COP right now is resource mobilization. How do we look to the parts of the world that do not have the wealth that they need to survive in a decent quality of life? In some cases, because the wealthier parts of the world have taken the resources from their nations, from their communities, to create the wealth that we do have. So we have to figure out a way not to concentrate the wealth that nature gives all of us and take it away and put it in a small circle, but that wealth has got to be shared. When the nature provides the wealth has to go back to all of nature. And that's hard. That's really hard. There's 3 groups being co-chaired by ministers from North and South right now trying to get the targets done, but also this question of resource mobilization and what do we do about the genetic code? Like, are we going to allow that to all of a sudden reconcentrate the wealth of nature? These are the things we've got to fix. So for those of you who have connections to delegations from Europe and other parts of the world that are fighting back against these things, please tell them that these core issues have got to be there. We've got to recognize this. There is wealth to go around on this planet, but it comes from nature, and we have to have that reciprocity. We have to give back to nature, and we have to take that responsibility.
Thank you so much. We are running a little low on time, but before we close things off, I want to open it up to the audience to maybe take 2 or 3 questions that our panelists can quickly address. I'm not sure if there are any questions online, but does anyone in the audience have a question or 2? Yes.
Thank you so much. It was so insightful. Yeah, that works. Perfect. So we heard a lot about like education, the importance of education being like one of the pillars, but education takes time. So we talked about like reforming the education system, which is not going to happen like tomorrow. And at the same time, we also heard about how Canada is falling behind, right? So we're already late. So we need everyone like to be educated on that matter, but we're actually really late. So, and the fact that we need action now, right? So we all agree on these 3 elements that seem to be paradoxal, I'll put it this way. So I'd love to hear you on upskilling the current workforce, especially Pamela steer for all the CPA that you have in your associations. So I'd love to hear about like, when you say we have new standards coming. So of course, we're all waiting for the ISSB. So I'm really curious about like, yeah, what are you guys already doing for upskilling the workforce?
So I guess I'll start. No, thank you for that question. I agree. So yes, I agree with Chief Joe as well. I think it does start in the K to 12, but you're right. I mean, it takes a while to grow a little human being. And I hope we're working on those things. And I think that's very important. But we do have 220,000 chartered professional accountants in Canada already, plus we're making more every year. That's a really exciting and important responsibility. And in terms of education, there are so many resources out there now. I think it's about telling people about them and where to find them. So here's a few. So here's some actions. So there is a value creation certificate that CPA Canada is just launching, so brand new, very exciting, to talk about how you integrate and what long-term value creation is that incorporates all of these capitals in this idea. There is something called the Accounting for Sustainability Learning Academy as well, which is a course that we're hoping to partner with them on in developing further. We've had a couple very successful pilots. There are resources on CPA Canada's website, both reading, there are courses. So there is everything from very, very short to, you know, multi-day certificate programs at a postgraduate level. You just need to be able to figure out how to find where they are and avail yourselves of them. There is more to be done, but there are a number of programs, of courses, of things that already exist. I actually helped out with the CFA, so this is more the investor side, taking a climate investing program. They're looking, how do you integrate climate into actual investing and portfolio management decisions? You know, it's a start, and a lot of and you know, even Queen's University, they offer a climate program, and it's a couple of days. I did the pilot there too because I'm part of the institute. So it is getting the word out. People are all very busy professionals. So it is, again, emphasizing the importance in your business. And then again, I'm going to refer to accounting for sustainability. The whole point of the CFO Leadership Network groups across the world is that large organizations have a responsibility to go there first. They have more resources, they have more capabilities. So they've created a big series of guides to help businesses then lower down on the value chain, help them implement, integrate sustainability thinking in very pragmatic ways. Here are things you can do to measure the maturity of your organization on mental health, as an example. We did a thing when I was at the Workplace Safety Insurance Board on championing mental health in the workplace as also a compensable illness if you're ill or injured in the workplace. Very important. So these guides are actual implementable action steps that organizations can take to embed and integrate this kind of thinking. And I think the more that we can read, the more that we can learn, then the better we are equipped to talk to our boards, to talk to our CEOs, to talk to our leadership teams, to talk to our, and it's right from the bottom. You can have an influence in your space, whatever that space happens to be, public sector, private sector, publicly traded company, public sector. There are all ways to make positive change. And I agree with you. There's a big job to do, and we have to tackle it at every level. The senior professional, the newbie starting out, those who have decided that that's the course of study they want to take, and then the kids right from the get-go. How are you? And actually, I would say, having a son as well, I would say they're way better at it than us. They know what is recyclable at their school. They know they have to take recyclable containers to school, not take lots of packaged crap to both eat and put in their bodies, not to mention the packaging that contains that food and that nutrition. So they are well equipped. They're going to teach us, and they are teaching us already, but there is more that we can do on the formal education and curriculum side.
Thank you. I may just take 2 more questions from the audience, and then maybe the rest of the panelists can answer those questions concurrently. Yes.
So thank you so much for the panel. And I actually have a comment, a question, and possibly a challenge for you. And it's also my first time in one of these offices. I come to you from a very different industry, which is design and art. So there were 3 things that I wrote down that I loved, which is we need more love and light, 100% agree. You know, we are all nature, and I loved that Chief Leanne Joe kind of reminded us of all being on the same level. And that we need a mindset shift, big time. And I think, you know, the comment is basically there was some cities have used design tools to try to change thinking, you know, so thinking about, okay, what's the experience of an earthworm, you know, in a city? That very quickly shifts your mindset from thinking about just us to, you know, another creature. So my question is often I see in different panels about biodiversity, climate change, there's a sector of people, professionals missing sometimes, and it's people in the arts and design. We're not always involved, sometimes, but often not. So my question is, do you sometimes pull in people for brainstorms and things like that from the art sector, people who rely on the right brain a bit more? And then my challenge to you is, if you don't, maybe you could think about doing that.
Amazing, thank you. Perhaps we can address those two questions. How do you bring in others, and how do you educate your workforce or those around in your community? Senator Galvez?
Yes, so first, I would like just to say that we brought some of copies of our white paper on sustainable finances, which talks about climate risk and the double materiality and the and actually the things that are needed. You know, for example, in your sector, fiduciary duty is something important, capital adequacy is another thing, but also about conflict of interest on the boarding and the decision boards, and also bringing the expertise of climate into the decision boards, or for example, another expertise that is needed in biodiversity or in energy. So if you want, Stefan there, he brought some copies of this white paper. So to the second question, I have tried always to communicate this issue about the destruction of our planet and the importance of stopping that and the impact on our health. And one of my staff in my office is a lawyer, and she did a master's in law, in environmental law in London, and she said that she tried using humor and met with people that try using art. And of course, we want to have all the ideas to communicate, because when we want to change the mind, we need to have triggers. We need to have something which we connect at the personal level, and we are also different. So of course, my rational mind of an engineer will accept logic, but talk to these politicians, and logic doesn't change anything, you know? So we need creativity, we need a figure, we need a sound, we need music. One of my colleagues is a museologist. She deals with museums. And she proposed me to make an art exhibit on climate change and the impact. So yes, of course, it's very impressive. If you fly over the tar sands, it's like you think that you're in another planet. So absolutely, but you know, this is appealing to the negative feelings. I am sure that artists have other ways that will appeal to the emotions of love, of solidarity, of sharing. So if you have any ideas, please, I'm very eager and open to hear. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe I'll pass it off to Chief Joe, I think.
Yeah, my call to action is put somebody creative on every single board. Have an artist, have a thought leader. Yeah, somebody that is going to consistently think outside of the box, challenge the technical spaces, because when you have many technicians leading, you can get hyper focused in space about solutions, and having somebody that uses the different side of the brain, or thinks in really unique and multisensory ways is going to go a long way towards creating beautiful spaces. The one thing that I did want to mention is go back to what was shared about nature and having voice for them. One thing I want to add to that is they do have voice. We're just not listening. They have a voice. They're speaking to us. Our spirits aren't connected, and we have to connect without. And that's what I mean about relationship. It's not just relationship with each other and business to relationship. It's a relationship with all living things. So that's a key aspect. And again, that's the shift in our mindset about what we value as well. Because if we're questioning, this is where the creative mind is going to come into play. For me, the value of wealth isn't because more or less you have $1 more in your bank account than I do, or vice versa. The value is, again, the well-being of all things, the land, the water, my son, my unborn grandchildren, my relationship to the ancestors, the relationship to my higher self and spirit, to the amount of love and happiness that I can bring into the world, the language that resonates in my heart, but I can't speak because of residential school. You know, all of these things are value to me. So we have to look at what is the culture of wealth, and how do we embed new ways of feeling and being with how we define what wealth is in our societies, in a global economy. And again, that begins like, I'll go back to that personal journey as well. Our education system can shift in a paradigm way by one teacher at a time, by asking your students what they value. What is wealth to them? How do they bring wealth and into space as well? If we're constantly being curious with each other and being a learner and a teacher in space equally, then our education can automatically shift whilst we're doing huge reform. But again, it's a personal responsibility to be able to connect and be in relationship about what we really want to see and be in the world. Because I too am an optimistic by choice. It's in my nature. So those are the few things that have come to my mind in the last bit of sharing about where my thoughts were on those. So Siyám.
Thank you so much. Livia, do you have a couple words? I know we're running a bit over time into the next panel, so I just asked the last two to keep it brief.
I will just add a comment on the role of art. It's one of my passion, and every time I see a Bansky painting appearing in some corner of the world, that I think I wish I had that with my clients. Meaning the ability to kind of communicate something that is so difficult to communicate in such a painting. It requires some sort of magic, and I think the art has a lot overall to play there, because talking with the audience, we struggle when we kind of navigate technical aspects, very complex, but the level of communication that when that happens is magic. People can see the vision, can see the problem very, very clearly, with a level of clarity that you wouldn't be able to communicate with a book, for example. So definitely we need more of yours in the sector, and to contribute to the discussion, because there is so much that I can see the potential of this very, very, as very important. So
Thank you. And Jay.
I'll just be very short. The David Suzuki Foundation is very committed to having the arts and the culture and the creative pieces in with the science and the technology and the learning about traditional knowledge and laws and ways of being. So yes, to all of that. And other than that, I just want to thank Chief Joe for clarifying the words that I was trying to speak, and I will leave it there.
Thank you so much, everyone.